I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to kind of read through our welcome screen and get comfortable. My name is Rachel Lohof Larsen, and I am the Integrity Soils online student support person. So if you reach out to student support at integritysoils.com, as you're moving through the online courses, I am the person who responds to your emails and does my best to either answer your question or steer you towards the correct resources to answer your questions. So I will drop that in the chat at some point if you do feel like that is relevant and you need some support as you move through the online courses or have broader questions for integrity soils. And I want to introduce to you today, we are starting off with Sarah Svoboda from South Central South Dakota, where she works as an agroecological coach, as the resilient ranch coach. So if you could all welcome Sarah and let's get started.
Thank you, Rachel. Can you see my screen?
Wonderful.
All right. Today I'm sharing with you a current project I'm working on with some clients. They call it the highway field. And we're going to go through the history of this property, some key observations when I first stepped onto the property, diagnostics from soil testing to plant tissue testing, and then an action plan that we came up with together that best suits this client's goals. My goal with sharing this presentation today is to one, give folks an idea of what it might be like to work with an agroecological coach. And then two, for those of you who have taken or are considering the online courses, to give you an idea of how to apply that knowledge. So let's get started. To give you a lay of the land, the highway field was a leased property for decades. The landowner leased this property out to a neighbor that runs a feed yard. The field was primarily used for corn or cane silage. It has a history of heavy NPK use, a history of tillage. It had not seen livestock for 30 years before 2024. And it is a Milboro silty clay, pretty heavy clay content soil. So why I was called in is because this client was really frustrated with their first year production, taking over uh, taking over new management. And these issues were very new to this client because the management was so different than the way they typically manage their land. And they were simply overwhelmed and did not know what to do or where to start. So I have to remind myself this a lot as well. But when we are overwhelmed with a project like this, let's remind ourselves to break it down. So we have a great tool to break down these complex issues using the 5 M's. Let's look at the management. Let's look at the microbes, the minerals, the organic matter, and then we'll check that client's mindset as well as we go through this project. So when I first stepped onto this field, I want to speak to how it felt first. It was quiet. There was very little insect activity, wildlife, bird activity. It felt very hollow. Underfoot, the soil felt like concrete. And it just had a very sick feeling to it, very lacking in vibrant life. Uh, Key observations were a pretty obvious low production, compacted, blocky soil. This soil made me feel like a wimp. It was all I could do to dig a hole. And then Canadian thistle and yellow salsify, also known as goat's beard, were prevalent across the entire field. The goals of this client are really simple, just to increase production, and they want to use the field to extend their grazing season. So we spoke a little bit on management these last couple of slides. Let's move on. Let's look at microbes. I did some biological testing. It was performed by a Create grad, Brandy McCoy of Thriving Lands. And I want to point out the fungal to bacterial ratio 0.01, low, low, low. I want to see that number closer to 1 to 1. So we have a highly bacterial soil, and I'm going to be going forward looking into what can I do to increase fungal biomass and to feed those fungal friends. Mineral testing was performed by Ward Laboratories in Nebraska. Because I don't love to look at it on this screen, I have my own spreadsheet here to go through it with you, but nothing really stood out like glaringly obvious thing that we need to just immediately tackle or address, or excesses or deficiencies. What I want to point out here is our calcium to magnesium ratio is 6.1 to 1. Now, that does put us in what we call the Goldilocks zone of 5 to 1 to 8 to 1. This is the zone where a soil will be resistant to compaction from machinery. But knowing that this soil has a high clay content, I want to see that ratio shift higher, closer to that 8 to 1, maybe even a skosh higher than that even. And then organic matter here, knowing this is a heavier clay soil, I want to see this organic matter over 5%. Let's see. I was reading your chat here. Plant tissue testing was also performed by Ward Laboratories. I sent in yellow salsify as an undesirable plant, and then oats for our desirable crop. Comparing them side by side, I'm looking for anything obvious, any glaring differences between our undesirable plant to our desirable plant. Here I want to point out calcium. Yellow salsify, although not what the client wants to see, is working very hard to mine calcium for us in this field. And it shows here in the numbers. So that's another way that we can work to reframe our thinking on these undesirable plants is, although we wish we weren't seeing them, they're working hard for us to heal the soil. Another thing I noticed and want to point out is boron. That's a pretty big difference here. I'm not, in our initial action plan, we did not visit this, but in our retesting and going forward, we might come back to that. So what did we do? What are we doing? Um, I came onto the property late fall 2024 and started work right away. But initially, we're starting with multi-species cover crops. We want to maintain a living root in the soil for as long as possible. We're also utilizing a variety of roots to break up compaction, and also that root mass there season long, as it decomposes, that's going to add to our organic matter. We reintroduced livestock, utilizing high density grazing to kickstart biology. And this high density grazing is also a great management tool to increase our organic matter. This reintroduction of livestock completes our mineral cycle and puts the nutrients we're taking from the soil back where it belongs, back to the soil. We bale grazed the crop in the winter of 2024 to help increase organic matter and the as a way to manage that crop as it was drying up quickly, going downhill. We cut it to seize what we could out of it. We added calcium. We applied calcium nitrate. Uh, Calcium was added to flocculate the soil, and also because, according to our soil tests, we can use a little bit more. Calcium nitrate is great biological stimulant and provided nitrogen, which we also needed in the system. And then calcium nitrate provides double growth energy, and that helped our client in the 2025 season to increase production. Also, every trip across this field is an opportunity to feed the fungi. So we applied dry humate through the seed drill. And what is humate? Humate is an organic carbon rich material. It's formed from decomposed ancient plants. It is mined very similar to coal. It is in seams in the ground, just like coal. It is an excellent microbial stimulant and fungal food. We utilized cover crops that are known to be excellent mycorrhizal hosts. And then we also applied an endomycorrhizal seed treatment to that seed. And then at the same time, we applied the calcium nitrate. We also added fish hydrolysate, which is a great fungal food as well. So next for this field, we're going to retest, and we're going to see where we're sitting after our application of the calcium nitrate and another growing season with a very diverse crop. How is that calcium to magnesium ratio shaping up? And then also to address any nitrogen needs we're going to need for next season. And we're really going to look into assessing that compaction. And we're asking ourselves, do we need to take a more aggressive approach, such as a rip and drip? That is a last resort for my client. They want to use it as a last resort, but we're going to explore this spring what it looks like. So with that, do we have any burning questions, or shall we save those to the end?
Let's save those to the end unless someone absolutely is dying. Feel free to raise your hand and jump in. Uh, thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate that. Okay, with that, thank you, Sarah. And now we'll move on to Colin McClure. Colin is a soil health coach based out of northwestern Montana and the Flathead Valley. He has crop experience uh, from eastern Washington, and he operates aggregation agriculture there. Um, is there anything else you would like to add, Colin, before you get started here?
Trying to find the right menu for the to unmute here. No, that was great. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Sarah, for that for your presentation there. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Um, so kind of the my intention for this section of the call is to kind of figure out. Okay, so we've taken courses, we've thought about things, maybe applying new techniques, new processes. Maybe we have new problems we've discovered. Um, that kind of thing. And so what's next? What do we do? So what do we do when we get home? We're thinking about these things and we're kind of sitting down in the trenches and you've got ideas. But you're in the trenches, you're down in it, and we've been there, we've all been there before. Like, what do I how do I even start on this? Like, okay, I need to maybe maybe I'll put on some fish hydrolysate. Maybe I'll look at them. Where do I even get that? What even is it? Like, how do we even look at this? So maybe we'll look at humate and maybe who knows? Maybe there's some other cool thing we're not even thinking about. Maybe we want to integrate livestock. Well, that's where we come in. That's where the coaches and the consultants come in. Um, like Sarah and myself and the rest of the Create Fellowship. And so, but what do these relationships look like? We're, this coach client relationship, coach coachee. There's a lot of different terms for it, but what does that look like? So Sarah gave a great example of her client that she's working with in North Dakota, but I want to give a little different perspective here out of Tushy, Washington, a place called Tumac Farms. About 600 acres. They grow primarily vegetable crops, about 9 inches of precipitation on irrigated ground. You can see there's a field of spinach there on the right, and then there's some Walla Walla sweet onions there. Certified organic. Most of the vegetables go into production for processing. So a lot of spinach, kale, zucchini. What else was growing there? Quite a few other different crops. There's some beans and some other rotational crops and some cover crops as well. And then some cover crops were grown, like I said, and then we graze sheep on them as well. And so pretty diverse offerings, a lot of irons in the fire, and they're trying to keep tabs on all of that. Again, this is kind of that trenches I was talking about. A lot of stuff going on. So what was the problem? Primarily, we're focused with this project on spinach quality. One of the issues that they were facing is that there's a premium that's offered at the final product, if the right nitrate levels and the right aluminum levels are hit. So they're tested very aggressively, and if the final product meets these thresholds, then it can go into baby food, like Gerber baby food, or Nestle is one of the big buyers. Either go into baby food, or they also sell it as a tube feeding product. So if a patient's in a coma in the hospital and they need to feed them, they pump a tube in, and if our spinach was good enough, we can hit into that market. So there's a financial component here, and then there's also kind of a success component of being able to hit those levels. Also, along with this, we needed to keep the practices consistent. This is an organic operation, and so weed management was a very big piece to these clients, and we needed to kind of maintain the way that they were maintaining. And so there's also some issues with aphids. You can see here on some spinach, these other biting and sucking insects, kind of trying to manage the pest pressure there. And then they're also putting in quite a bit. Their nutrient program right now was pretty extensive and pretty elaborate, and it was costing a lot of money. So there was a lot of input costs to not hit these levels and not catch that final premium. So there's kind of a business level there too that we were trying to manage. But at the end of the day, this wasn't actually the problem. These were symptoms of the actual problem. So Sarah touched on the 5 M's here, and really we'll fly through those again, but these were all kind of, these 4 were built in management, minerals, microbes, and organic matter. Were all kind of pieces that fell into the most important one, which is the mindset. And so with the folks at Tumac Farms, what we discovered is that mindset was what was setting apart the main issues from them achieving where they wanted to be. The inputs they're putting in were not, they were tailored to achieve the results they were looking for as far as aluminum and nitrate levels. However, they weren't getting consistent results. Some years they'd hit the mark, some years they wouldn't. That was within pest pressures and the application of the different amendments and different nutrient programs we were putting on, which came down to stress. So the current mindset that they were operating in, the former mindset, was leading to a lot of stress. They were in those trenches. They had their set way they were running, and they were struggling through it, and it wasn't working. So what was the goal? What were the goals here? What was the solution we were looking at? We wanted to shift this mindset. So what levers do we control? What can we pull? How can we manipulate this? Like I said, the nutrition program was already put together, so it wasn't a nutritional issue, but we need to start with doing the least harm. And in this system, here's a ripper dripper over here on the top right. Sarah mentioned that there's a last case scenario here with this cultivation operation that we're looking at here in an organic system. They were ripping and cultivating all the time. So that was the harm that we were trying to get past. So when we rip, we also drip. When we till, we also incorporate some sort of food into that. Sugars, we're looking at some other biological stimulants, those kinds of things. And to try to keep from doing more harm than we need to, and kind of try to build that soil structure back up. And sugar, like I was talking about, is kind of the main way that we took it. It's a little bit oversimplified, the sugar, but we used molasses, backstrap molasses, and then an organic cane sugar too, that we applied as slurries and did with the ripper dripper setup, as well as some foliar applications as well. And we hammered the crap out of it with sugar. And it turns out biting insects, they hate sugar. They bite into that plant and they're like, ugh, what is this? It's gross. We don't like this. And then they focus from your desired plants, where we're boosting the Brix content, which is a measure of dissolved solids, primarily sugar, secondary metabolites, all those kind of good things. And they bite into a high Brix spinach plant that we've been on our principal crop. And they're like, we don't want to eat that. And they'll focus on the weed bands that are next to the field. So you'll walk out and we'll see we had some kochia and some pigweed, and a couple other weeds that would just be covered in aphids, and they wouldn't be on our spinach. And so this higher sugar content can kind of correlate with a more developed rhizosphere. So that's the area where the roots interact with soil, and it can kind of help to lower the aluminum levels and lower nitrates as well in the healthier plant. And so what did we see? What happened? Our spinach, we had, for every truckload of spinach we took to the processor, they had to dilute it to get it back to the levels that everyone else was coming in at by 1 truckload of water. So that was pretty cool to see. Brix increases, we increased our Brix from 5, which was what typically the spinach growing around in the area was at, up to 10. And then we got actually up to 11 in one of our pastures, or one field, pasture here, but fields, yeah. We hit baby food grade and then hit the premium for that year, and it was very good. And then we got also closer to a more repeatable, reliable nutrition program that kind of could help kind of fill in the voids of, maybe they have a down year where we didn't get a lot of early season moisture, or maybe it was too warm when the spinach was planted, needed the cool season to get started, that kind of thing. So it kind of levels out that uncertainty there. And like I said, we saw fewer weeds on the spinach and the pests. So this really led to a big mindset shift and thinking, okay, instead of blanket applying what we thought was working and what we thought we knew was working to now, okay, wait, let's take a step back. Let's pull ourselves out of the trenches. Let's look at this with some fresh eyes and maybe a fresh pair of underwear here, and see kind of what we can do. So with that, we'll take any questions. Thank you.
I lost my cursor there for a moment. Thank you for that, Colin. I really appreciate that perspective. So now we're going to open it up. And if you don't feel comfortable jumping in with your question, drop it in the chat and I will shout it out for you. Anyone? Do you want to jump in there with a poll? Okay, calcium nitrate. So why are you using calcium nitrate, Sarah, and not gypsum to increase calcium levels?
Typically, I would. In this field, the sulfur levels are extremely high, the highest I've ever seen in a field. So I didn't want to add any extra sulfate.
Sarah, did you make your own amendments or did you purchase amendments for application?
Purchased. Yep, they purchased calcium nitrate from their local co-op and humate from North Dakota. And
have you noticed any short improvements over the previous 2 years since you began this project in 2024?
the most noticeable thing was in the bale grazed area. The soil structure is so much better already. And production was better in 25 compared to 24. So 24 would have been their first season taking it back over.
Are you measuring that in terms of like pounds of forage produced? Are they harvesting? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Could you define the word flocculate? I'm not familiar with that.
So flocculate the soil, open up the soil, put more air into the soil and break up that compaction. Yes.
Why might you focus on the calcium magnesium ratio in that situation?
If a lower calcium to magnesium ratio is going to make a more compact, a blocky soil, a sticky soil, as that calcium increases, you will see better aggregation. There will be more air in that system because calcium is a very large molecule,
Yeah,
and
I like
more
to think of it.
calcium, more air pockets in there.
So calcium and magnesium have the same charge in terms of their electric charge, for lack of a better description. But calcium, in comparison to magnesium, is a big fluffy particle, and magnesium is a smaller particle. So it's more readily associated with clay soils, and you'll see greater compaction with higher magnesium levels because of the size of the particles relative to one another.
I love your description.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll here to bring in the physical comedy. What crops or cover crops are good to support an increase in mycorrhizal fungi, or which crops are good mycorrhizal hosts?
I love there's so many, but I love oats. I love like a sorghum sedan. Rye is good. So your brassicas are non-mycorrhizal. They are not going to form any mycorrhizal relationships. So we tend to stay away or smaller, reduce the number of brassicas such as rape, turnips, radishes, and yeah, so oats and sorghum sudan are the big ones, and we did have some rye in there as well
Do you
that we
have
use
any
in this field.
insight on this, Colin, as well?
Yeah, well, in the context of out in North Dakota, I don't have any specific
South
context there,
Dakota.
but South Dakota, excuse me, sorry, South. Um, but I think, but I've had a couple of clients that have played with a lot of um, different cover crops that are highly mycorrhizal, flax being one of them. That we've planted and had pretty good results with. It's kind of like figure out how to balance that piece of it, and then also to balance not only what the cover crop seed that you're growing, but then also whatever amendment you're applying with that, and if you're inoculating it correctly and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Javier had a question earlier in the chat and we kind of addressed it, but then you brought up ripping and dripping. Would you elaborate some more on the rip and drip system and what you're looking for when you're adding something to the soil as you're performing that mechanical disruption,
Absolutely.
Colin?
Yeah. So a ripping and dripping system. There, these types of systems are very common in vineyards, orchards, that kind of thing, and then also they're fairly ubiquitous across a lot of different cropping systems and into pasture systems as well. What the ripping portion of the ripping and dripping is, you think of like a large tractor or a large excavator that has deep shanks that are rolling into the ground, that's breaking up that soil compaction. And what it does is it breaks up those layers. So then the idea is that more water will infiltrate, and then roots develop in the presence of water. So then you think the idea is that, okay, cool, roots will go down and we'll have a healthier system because those roots will pump carbon into the ground. However, what happens is well, and that may work in some instances and break that up. But one of the issues we find is that when you break up that compaction, you disrupt the structure of the soil. And kind of like, if you think of it as an analogy, you kind of go through and you take the bartering system and the kind of market, and we go through and we just kind of carpet bomb it and then blow it all up. So then if we can kind of reduce the harm that we're doing with that, and we feed something with it, that's the drip that comes in. Um, that's kind of the rationale behind it. And with those drips, we can add in all sorts of different things. We can use molasses is a pretty typical, pretty cheap option to use. We can use different bacillus strains and different microbial mixes. We've added some trichoderma, which are a fungal species that has some other antifungal properties that kind of helps boost the soil, your health of your soil that way, and can help with some blights and that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know. There's 100 different things you could put into it. It kind of depends on what context you're looking at. So, yeah, hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you for painting that picture for us. Humates, Sarah, can you tell me more about why you lean towards the use of humates and what benefits you're seeing there?
So pretty much any property I'm working on is very low fungal, and humates are great fungal foods. It is also, for our area, or the area I primarily work in, really economical. Humate, they mine it in North Dakota. It's not too far away. So that's another reason we lean really heavy humate.
And it's a good fungal food because it is a long chain carbon, which the more long chain carbons we can introduce versus a simple sugar, which is a shorter chain carbon and more easy for bacteria to digest, the more we're going to help tip that balance between bacteria and fungi towards fungi in our systems. So with your sugars and your simple sugars and molasses, you're going to be feeding your soil bacteria. And with wood chips and humates, you're going to be feeding your more soil fungi. Right. Do either of you have any experience with seed inoculants?
I was typing up a response to that too. But I have quite a few different applications in seed inoculants. It kind of depends on what we're trying to grow. For example, we really want, if we're planting nitrogen fixing cover crops, we really want to have an inoculant that'll stimulate the rhizobia and kind of kickstart that nitrogen fixing ability, superpower, if you will. But we've used all sorts of different inoculants for seed treatment. So sometimes we'll use, if we're doing a budget option, we'll use vermicompost or a worm extract, worm tea, that kind of thing. We've also used different inoculants with, like I was talking about, with bacillus species and multitudes of other like off the shelf. Kind of rip open the package and dump it in, that kind of thing. But yeah, kind of depends on your context, what you're kind of looking for. So.
Okay, we're gonna take it a different direction for a moment. How do you communicate your action plans and your data and findings to your growers? Do you want to go first, Sarah?
Sure. I like to work with them. I like to present them kind of like a menu. Say, here's our low-hanging fruit that would the most bang for our buck, and this is, there's a multitude of ways we can address this. So, if we're talking about nitrogen and say there's these different sources of nitrogen, there's which way do you want to go with it, and we work together and we build that plan together. But them having that kind of menu in front of them to be able to read and go over maybe before we discuss the action plan, I find that really beneficial.
How about you, Colin?
Absolutely. I'll echo kind of what Sarah's saying. I'm it totally depends on the client. I've worked for some ranches that are 40,000 acres and they have, teams of lawyers, and we have to go through like due diligence processes almost. And so, and that they take formal reports that are, 5 to 10 pages long and with, cited resources and that kind of thing. And then I've also got farmers that work out of their, out of their pickups, and they want to, you know, they want if I send them an email, they'll be like, why did you email me? Just tell me what I need to do. And so it kind of depends on how we structure the relationship from the beginning. But yeah, usually it's like a 1 page action plan in the spring, and then in the fall, and we kind of open communication that way. So yeah.
Okay, we're circling back to humates again. It's a very popular topic today. Uh, does the amount of humates per hectare vary depending on your soil type? And would you need more for higher clay soils?
Question. I would, it would depend, I would say it would depend on what our testing is showing us. And I would also be looking at our organic matter. What's our organic matter content as we compare it to the soil texture? Are we super? Are we a higher clay content, but are we really low on organic matter? I would throw more humate at it, for example.
Do you have seen instances where the humate is impacting the structure in these tight, high clay soils?
I have not or been able to identify that, I guess.
I do. Yeah. I think it, like, as Sarah said, you want to look at the context, the specific context of the area that you're looking at, and then make these judgments and decisions based upon the testing that you use. So, what type of testing do you utilize as you go through this process? Colin, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, for sure. I can jump on that one. I want to say one quick thing about humates and an important distinction too. I think with thinking of humates and thinking of humates as an amendment, we're kind of thinking more about carbon. So I think more of carbon, and so kind of balancing a carbon to nitrogen ratio, for example, or feeding more carbon to your fungal communities and that kind of thing. And then there's an important distinction because thinking of it's like as humates per hectare is maybe you might be more beneficial to think about it as um, what type of carbon amendment should I be applying and how many hectares are we talking about covering? Because if you're going to haul in, a ton of usually humates sold by the ton, and if you're going to try to do that broadly over, hectares, plural, maybe 1 hectare, you might be able to ship it in. It's going to be very expensive, but humic acid is a much better way to think about that and then think of it as application. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that thing, but I think thinking of it as a carbon is a good way to source that. But
But
going to
there-
answer your question, Rachel,
there's
about sampling.
something, Colin.
What's
The
that?
there are Can I clarify something here?
Sure.
There are liquid sources of the humic acids and the carbons as well for foliar application. So it really is assessing, again, we're context. We're always coming back to your context. What makes the most sense for you in your particular operation? Does it make sense? Do you have the equipment to broadcast the humate, which is going to require a large amount of material? Or would it make more sense for a foliar spray application, or perhaps like Sarah is utilizing it essentially as a seed treatment and sending it down the drill when they are seeding a pasture? So there's multiple factors to consider prior to using it, but there are also liquid products for foliar applications as well. Okay, Colin, sorry to derail you there.
No, that's perfect. Thanks. Appreciate the context. But yeah, so Rachel, to answer your question about sampling, we use quite a couple of different labs depending on what we're looking at. Regen Ag Labs, we take soil samples and send them there. We'll take biological samples and send them there as well. I use a local lab here. Well, I don't know. There's a couple of different labs I use for water testing and that kind of thing too. And it kind of depends on what we're looking at and how to figure out how we can test to effectively measure if the levers we're pulling are working and we're pushing in the right direction. Are we headed in the right direction? So I think a lot of times we sample a little aggressively just to sample to think maybe we'll find something in the data down the road. But I think sampling can get really expensive. So that's kind of my approach to it. So
How about you, Sarah? Where do you start in terms of sampling, and what tests do you like to work with?
I like to get a pretty expansive mineral test and make sure I'm covering those trace minerals as well. So when dealing with a lab, definitely look at their menu and see. And I, if the soil temperature is right, I have a lot of people contact me in the winter and then want a full diagnostic uh, exam basically, but we have to wait for the soil to warm up for our biology. But yet I like to test biology and definitely get that fungal to bacterial ratio, our protozoa, our nematodes at a minimum. And
Uh, and,
are we
and
are we
what type
move, are we
is, well, um, when would you also do plant tissue sampling? And when do you feel that's relevant?
I love to nerd out on it, and I feel like it's always relevant. I definitely like to see that, and it is. I want to see it in before heading or before that plan is mature to give us a really good picture of what's going on before those nutrients are going back down into the soil. That's number one. Um, it's super relevant too if we can't do a biology to it can kind of bridge that gap, tell us what is in the soil that's not getting into the plant, and are those microbes that are usually there to help us do that, that can kind of give us an idea on if they're there or not, whether or not, if we can't get that biological assessment for some reason.
Colin?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different tests we can take to figure out what we want to take or what question we're trying to answer or what context we're trying to provide. I think tissue tests are a great way to show a point in time of what that plant is doing at that time. Sap analysis too, we can measure the sap flowing through the plant, and then that shows us kind of more of a longer term kind of a blood. It's more of like a blood test. Um, and then soil tests and that kind of thing are more longer term as well. So there's kind of a temporal or a time related sampling question that we need to answer there too. Um, and then yeah, it kind of goes back to your context of what we're trying to do. Um, but yeah, typically like Sarah was saying, a mineral test to figure out what chemically is going on in the soil, and then if we have budget and time to take a biological test to see what's going on there, and then kind of repeat as necessary. Especially with amendments, once we apply amendments, we need to be testing afterwards to see if they worked or not. And testing could be post amendment; it could be putting a shovel in the ground to see, or a measuring the potentiometer or like the pressure it takes to push a rod into the soil, or kind of it doesn't necessarily have to be a lab test, but just to kind of see if we're pushing the needle or not.
So you mentioned bricks in your
Mhm.
case study and that you saw a rise in bricks, which is the measure of the amount of dissolved solids in that plant tissue at that moment in time. When might you utilize a refractometer for bricks measurements?
Yeah, and a refractometer was the picture that thing I had on there. It's kind of like a little periscope kind of telescope looking thing, and it'll show you lines on how much dissolved solid. It expresses that as a percent. So the percent bricks kind of, you'd see that, you'd use that. Well, we've used it many different times. So in a in the context of vegetable growing, or once you start to, we grew some spinach seed one time, and if you can take different bricks readings at different times during the growth of that plant. So you maybe right as it starts to bud, or right as it starts to come out and you start to set your leaves, you can take a sample then, and then see kind of where your sugar or what your bricks content is pushing, and then sample again when it starts to bolt or starts to seed set, and then see kind of where you're at there too, and to kind of see the differences. You can also use refractometers and bricks measurements to measure the sugar content of your desired species and then your non-desired species, and see which one. It's kind of a down and dirty quick way to look at which one is flowing more sap and more sugar, and which one is effectively out competing the other. And so that's kind of a really effective use of that tool as well. Um,
Do
I've
you
also
utilize
got a,
in a rangeland setting, Sarah?
Yes. Yes, I always have my crusher and my refractometer along.
And kind of what are you looking for when you do that in the field?
I like to use it to determine overall plant health. I use it in the pasture to give me an idea of what my cows are getting. Are they getting enough? Is my bricks low? Do I need, to look towards supplementation for the cows if they're not getting what they need out of the grass? And that's a something I can do instantly and give me a fair idea right away.
So, are there other kind of instantaneous, easy to perform tests that you utilize in the field? I'm thinking, I know what I'm thinking. I guess I'll throw it to you too. That even a producer could conduct without the assistance of a coach.
Absolutely. My favorite is infiltration testing. It's really eye-opening to, especially to folks that have never seen it. Um, and that would be uh, for putting a ring in the ground and simulating an inch of rain. How long will it take for that inch of rain to infiltrate into the soil? And boy, I've been surprised a lot of times. A lot of times it's very, so it's something I always have with me as well for clients or just curious folks, kind of give them an idea of what is happening when we get these rainfall events. Where is your rain going?
How about you, Colin? Is there one that comes is top of mind?
The biggest one that's cost effective and that comes to my mind immediately, excuse me, is a shovel. Shovel is the first one for me. So we go out and we can throw the shovel in the ground and we can kind of start to, if it goes in easy, then that's great. Or maybe it just rained. But if it's going in hard, then maybe we have some work to do as well. So, and then also like you can dig a hole and start looking at what's happening in the subsoil, or is our in a cover cropping context, are we fixing nitrogen, in another context, are our roots covered, are our roots bare, and that kind of thing. You can kind of really visually see what's going on, and pretty easy to carry a shovel around. So everyone's got shovels.
We have
Ubiquitous.
two more quick questions. Feel free, again, I'll drop my email in the chat if you have additional questions after this that we might be able to answer. And I'm going to start with this one and then we'll move on to the more marketing and building a client-based question. But what do you feel is the optimal bricks for dry land or rangeland, Sarah, or your grass species in particular?
For grass, I want to see it over 12. Um, and I'm happy with that.
Do you feel like are I guess are there differences between the target bricks for grass species versus legumes and forbs?
Yes, yes, I want to see grass over 12, and I want to see legumes over 16 at least. And this is also dependent on what stage that plant is in. If it's a later stage, if it's already headed, you're gonna be looking at a lower bricks than if it's actively growing.
Those nutrients have been relocated into the flowering parts of the plant to
Yes.
encourage reproduction. So the bricks will read differently at those times of year.
Yes.
How about you? I see Colin kind of addressed that in the chat. Um, what approach do you have to building your client base?
I can take this one. So I kind of like I put in the chat. I've kind of it takes a while to build up this type of relationship. A lot of interactions after conferences or at conferences or after talks or workshops or kind of field days, that kind of thing. that seems to facilitate a lot of interest and that kind of thing. Um, and then through my work with the Western Sustainability Exchange as well, there's been quite a few clients that have come in through that network as well. But it's interesting. Sometimes I'll have conversations with folks and we'll have they'll I don't know, it doesn't come up that I know what I know and to like, hey, I'm a coach for that. I can help you with that. I'm like, oh yeah, cool, we got to figure it out. And then a month later, they're like, wait, you know all that? That's so awesome. We should work together. And so it's really interesting the way that the world comes about and that clients show up in your life, and it's pretty great.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that, Colin. Do you have anything to add, Sarah?
Well, number one for me, being a producer myself, is to lead by example and to practice what I preach and walk the walk on my own place and invite folks to come take a look. We also have our own highway field, and that's where I like to do all my trials or wild and crazy stuff to catch people's eye. And then volunteering. I volunteer with different organizations to help plan events or charity events, and just getting out there and volunteering, doing the good work,
I
meeting lots of
appreciate
folks.
Thank you both for sharing your expertise and your experience with us today. I really appreciate it. For those of you who have joined us from the website or the online courses, if you wouldn't mind uh, dropping some answers to this poll, we'd really appreciate it. It helps inform us in what topics we're going to address. We're attempting to make this a monthly um, practice, these webinars. And so if you have any questions or specific topics that you want us to explore in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out again to that student support at integritysoils.com email, or reach out to the coaches because we really appreciate it and we want this to be informative and beneficial for you as well. Is there anything else before we wrap up here on the hour? All right. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for asking the hard questions. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
All right.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.